Hello there. I'm back again. It's been a little while, but sometimes it just is a while, isn't it? That is the way of things. And today I want to bring you an insight that I've been very bullish on lately, which I think could really help you out. So I think this is going to be one of my more practical videos while also being somewhat esoteric. So that's kind of my favorite combination as a philosopher. These subtle little insights that can make all the difference in your life. So, the people who this is going to especially help, I think, are people who are caught up in their own head and also quite ambitious and judgmental of themselves at the same time. So, probably around this time of year, you guys have some New Year's resolutions, or you're too scared to have New Year's resolutions because they haven't worked in the past. Things of this nature. I think I can possibly help you out. So lately, as a lot of my best friends can attest, I've been getting very into the idea of presence. Okay, so this has a lot of different names in the therapy world. They tend to call it mindfulness. In the Zen Buddhist world, I understand they call it Zazen. Eckhart Tolle, who I just read his book A New Earth, calls it presence. So just being present. I think there's a lot to that. So that's probably the word I'm going to stick with. I'm going to call it presence because it doesn't overcomplicate things too much, although people could be confused because of course there's a lot of presents around Christmas time, but that is not the kind of presence I'm talking about. I'm talking about being completely and totally in the moment and how simple that is and yet vexing for so many people. I'm going to talk to you about the strength of it and the subtlety of it via a tool which is very useful to me as a musician and very predominant in the world of any disciplined musician, which is not necessarily me, but it's called a metronome, okay? So what is a metronome? A metronome is simply a machine that keeps a set beat for you, a set tempo. So just to show you what I mean by that, it sounds like this. So it ticks along. I'm not going to keep it ticking along the whole video, don't worry. But this is something that's foundational to musicianship, but also a healthy state of mind, because when people first hear this as musicians, they're usually trying to practice an instrument. And so the objective is to stay in time with this machine. And the first thing I always tell my students, if you didn't know I'm a guitar teacher, is that you don't have to use your intelligence to keep track of the beat. In fact, you can't. You actually need to embody the beat. So that means that you can, at the level of an almost subconscious awareness, keep track of the beat while still actually keeping most of your mental CPU available like I'm doing now. But a prerequisite of that is that you stay absolutely present, because there is a part of you, and you can call it the ego, that will actually start to panic, especially if you're doing something complicated. You may fall off the beat slightly and it will try to pick up the slack by trying to guess. Goes, oh, when's the next one? Oh, now it's now. No, it's now. No. Oh, now I'm out. Oh, I've fallen out of line with the metronome. Now I need to get back. Do I go backwards? Do I go forwards? Do I lag or do I rush? And all of these things cause this anxiety to occur, because in your desperate grasping to become better at keeping track, you fall out of the moment and you become worse and worse at it. And your mind starts to turn against itself, okay? But if you just spend a second falling back into the moment, then computationally you regain your ability to keep track, okay? So I'm going to pause it now. So this is a hopefully revelation to some people who have hang-ups about not having rhythm or not being able to be in the moment. If you spend a little time with a metronome, especially trying to execute something, whether it's dance moves or whether it's playing something on a musical instrument or even singing, you spend a little bit of time with this discipline, you will realize that being in the moment and having rhythm are one and the same, okay? They are not two different skills, they are one skill. And that skill extends to much more than just keeping track of a beat. So this is my theory as to why some musicians tend to be charismatic people, okay? So why would I say that? So let's unpack that a little bit, because let's take some examples of other skills, mental skills, which become infinitely more efficient if you can be present in the moment. So the first is listening or memorizing, okay? So as I'm saying this to you, there is a moment that is passing through every word that I'm saying. And if you are traveling with that moment and just listening, you will remember almost everything I say. Your memory will be as good as it can possibly be. If you are present in this moment with me, then there is absolutely nothing standing in the way of your memory doing the best job it can possibly do. However, if you begin to grasp at it, if you begin to guess what I'm trying to say, or try to remind yourself of what I said, when this thing happens where you start to lag into the past or rush into the future, now you are getting in the way of your memory's ability to do a good job. You are hamstringing your brain's cognitive potential through egoic or intellectual rumination, or however you'd like to put it. And so here's an example of something where you might try to intellectually insist on that stance, that mental stance, but it will hurt your chances of doing a good job at the skill, which is listening or memorizing or simply just being present, okay? And this is actually a foundational element of social skills, communication, etc., etc. The actual nuts and bolts of really charisma, but just being present with someone, is just exactly this: staying in the moment. You with me? Instead of drifting around mentally. So if you're drifting around mentally now, I want you to take a second and just breathe and just come back to the moment. And as so many people say, just notice the things that are trying to pull you out. And when you notice it, just come back. That's it. It's not complicated, right? It's not about being clever, it's about being present. Okay, so that's the first one, right? We're being present, and it's giving us the ability to remember what's happening, to notice what's happening, to fully absorb what's happening now, and that's an invaluable skill. Okay, that and having a good memory are one and the same thing, okay? There are addendums you can use, like memory palaces and all of that stuff, but all of that can't function optimally without this skill, okay? So here's the next thing, which is sort of an extension of that, okay? And that is what I'm doing now. So that is articulating yourself. So I'm here, I'm talking to you, and if I am just simply, with maximal clarity, experiencing the present moment of what it feels like to communicate this message to you, then I'm doing the best possible job that my brain has in its store of actually communicating the message. As soon as I go, what am I trying to say? What was I trying to say? Am I going to be able to say it? Where am I going? Why am I going there? If I start to play that game, then the whole infrastructure of articulation begins to fall apart. And suddenly I'm not doing a very good job of communicating. And if I'm having a conversation with someone, that becomes a two-way street. So conversations can only have good chemistry when both people are practicing the two skills that we're talking about here simultaneously. Being present when they're listening and being present when they're articulating themselves. And again, the ego is going to constantly, if it's not sort of cultivated with some degree of discipline, it's going to try and take over these activities, and it's going to actually hamper your ability to do a good job with either. It's like that old expression that too many cooks spoil the broth, right? You don't need to insist on listening, to insist on articulating yourself in order to do it well. In fact, it's on the contrary, right? So life gets easier this way, and you also get better at doing what you're supposed to be doing, okay? So this is why I'm calling it anxiety and the metronome. Anxiety is this part of you that says, I can't do what needs to be done unless I can plan ahead and think everything through, etc., 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 ad infinitum, ad nauseum. And while there is a value to that faculty, and I was talking about that with a friend today, and it's worth discussing that, okay, I'm not writing off anxiety like it's something you should never do. Here are two skills which are extremely important, which anxiety will not help you with, okay? So, and people probably, you might have heard this, anxiety can't exist in the present moment. It doesn't have that capacity, okay? I've talked about that in previous videos. Because it's a looking ahead, it's a restlessness born of looking ahead. What that means is if you're in the present, it disappears, it vanishes like a mirage. So, okay. Then the next one is, what should I be doing? What should I do next? Okay, this is something that a lot of people struggle with, especially this time of year with New Year's resolutions and stuff. And we've talked about this in the past in the relatively old video now called The Tyranny of the Timetable. There's a fear that you have that you should be doing X, Y, or Z, and that if you're going to live up to your potential, or if you're going to do what needs to be done, if you're going to optimize, all of these lovely words, then you have to kind of plan everything out, and you have to figure out what it is that you're supposed to be doing. And again, this is where there's probably the most tension between this kind of presence mind and this planning mind that pulls you into an abstract experience of the future. But even then, I would appeal to you to, wherever possible, be present in what you are doing rather than look to the future to try and seek out what you should be doing now. So it's interesting, me and my friend were discussing this, and I have some recordings of our discussion, so I'll probably start putting them up here eventually, but the thing that you have to realize is that, sorry, I fell out of the moment. I started thinking about something else. Okay, so looking to the future using planning. Yeah, so if you have a to-do list, that in principle is a great thing, right? But what we were discussing today is that almost all of them, because of the term to-do list, the technology actually makes itself more distressing than it needs to be, because every time you refer to this list, there's actually all of the things you need to do in your field of vision. Every time you refer to what you should be doing now, there's this subconscious reminder that there's all these other things that you should be doing. And it starts to pull you out of the moment, and it starts to cause you to identify with this kind of version of yourself that, you know, is almost like in indentured servitude to this never-ending list. And so if you do have a to-do list, which is in principle a good thing to have, try to be as present with what you're actually doing at any given time as you can be, and you will do it as well as you possibly can. You'll get through that to-do list as effectively as you possibly can. And we were talking about the idea that maybe what that means is, instead of having a list, have flashcards or an app with like a flashcard simulator, essentially. Because what that's going to do for you is it's going to give you what you're meant to be doing, quote unquote, one thing at a time, okay? And you don't always have to militantly insist on that, but that is something that you can have as a toolkit, right? Because there's another way of doing the things that need to be doing, which is just simply allowing your attention to flow where it needs to go, right? So my friend today, I don't know why, I started talking about folding clothes, and he was folding clothes. And so when you're folding clothes, you're doing that. You're in the process of doing this thing that needs doing, right? So you're folding your clothes. But what might happen, especially if you have a few things to do, or you have a few things around in your environment that kind of need doing, well, maybe you'll notice something else, and then your attention will be drawn to that. So today, there was some honey on his kitchen counter, I assume, that kind of needed to be put away in the process of tidying. And so that pulled him away from his process of folding the clothes. So in my ethos, I'm not saying this is like the right thing to do or anything, but this is something I find helpful. If my attention is drawn over to the honey, I'm happy to focus on the honey now. If there's no particular order that the things need to be done, what I'll normally do is put faith in my brain's computational ability to keep track of the clothes that need folding, and I'll just let my presence move to the honey, do what needs to be done with that, and then come back to the clothes, rather than having this whole mental stack happening where you go, I've noticed the honey, but I need to drag my attention back into the past so I can come back to this thing that I'm doing, and then I need to remember the honey for the future. Can you see the difference there? Because once that happens, your consciousness is now less concentrated like a laser into the moment, and it starts to disperse out into this abstract nebulous form, and it becomes stretched more and more thin, and it becomes less and less sustainable, because that's not reality, right? The past and the future are fundamentally illusions, and some people are going to take objection with that, but that's a conversation for another day. What you really want to be doing to maximize your efficiency, whether you're just trying to relax your mind, or if you're some kind of grind set person, it amounts to the same thing. You should be concentrating your mind down to a laser point in the present. And if that's honey, if that's the honey now, then let it be the honey, don't fight it. And then trust that the present will carry you to the future where you've done your putting your honey away, and now you can come back to folding the clothes. And if your attention keeps getting moved from thing to thing, let that happen and deal with the distress, especially if you identify as, ADHD, or like you have this kind of, I'm so, like, my brain is messed up or whatever because I can't concentrate on the X, Y, or Z thing for like an extended period of time. try experimenting with the feeling that that's not an issue, that what you're really doing is just remaining present and your attention is organically moving from place to place, but maybe that's okay, right? You know, not to say that there's no situations where you need to cultivate the mental discipline to remain on one task. Of course, there are situations where that's to your benefit, but just be discerning and be present enough to recognize the difference, right? Feel the emotions in your body and the thoughts in your mind, and try to recognize where the difference between making something happen, like forcing something to happen, or versus just simply going with the moment, going with the flow, right? I think that there's a visceral distinction that can be felt between those two stances towards life. And that will give you a good clue as to what it is you quote unquote should be doing at any given time. You know, one final example of this that I think a good kind of presence-ometer, if you like, is a thing that we all have, which is our smartphone. So we all carry this around with us everywhere. And if you don't, congratulations. I hope I can be more like you one day. But most of us do for either practical reasons or just because that's just what people do or whatever. And the reason the phone, I think, is a very good measure of whether, as a presence-ometer, a measure of whether you're really being present, is because there's a tendency that we almost all have to pull out our phone and look aimlessly at it and scroll. And that is a surefire sign, in my opinion, that there is a part of you that is feeling dissatisfied with the moment or has become unconscious of the moment, and it's now kind of mindlessly, or, you know, mindfully, depending on how you think about the mind, it's roving around in the abstract future, vaguely looking for something to pull it out of the moment that it's in. And so you can alchemically take that recognition as you're pulling out your phone to look, to scroll or whatever. It's like, ding, 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 it's happening. If you can notice that, you might go, why am I doing this? Why is this phone in my hand, right? What's happened? I'm not doing this for a reason. I'm doing this aimlessly, right? I'm falling into unconsciousness. I'm falling into the abstract. I'm falling out of the present moment. And if you can do that, if you can notice that even, then I think you can restore the miracle that is the smartphone in terms of its actual capabilities, right? If you seek out your smartphone with intention, whether that's to communicate with people or use one of its countless gizmo superpowers that it grants you, that it's a wonderful thing, right? It's only when it's this thing that vaguely is trying to pull you away from the present moment, which is all that you need, that it becomes this kind of torture device. It's like stretching your consciousness in this, like, I find very tense and unpleasant way, even though you think it's what you want. Famously, people having done it for a while start to feel miserable, right? And when it starts to run their life, then that's when people start talking about smartphone addiction and all of this stuff, okay? So I hope you can see where all that springs from, you know, a shared phenomenon, which is being here or being somewhere else, and the egoic tendency to imagine that being somewhere else makes you better in X, Y, or Z way, when in reality, very often the cognitive processes that you need to function optimally require that you focus your concentration on where you are right now, okay? That's flow state. That's sports psychology 101. At the end of the day, that's what you need. So I hope that's helped you in some way. That insight for me is kind of steering the ship at the moment. I hope that I can maintain it. I know that there's an ephemeral nature to insights like this. Sometimes we can sort of forget what has worked. And certainly I don't want it to run the channel because I probably will talk about presence a lot, but I have lots of other things to discuss as well. But I really do hope that that helps you, because I think if you let it, it can actually change your life in an extremely positive way, extremely positive and profound way. So I send you my love. I wish you Happy New Year, and I suppose belated Merry Christmas. And I'll see you next time.